Mick Floyd, the racing and media manager at Sandown Park, and looking well, Mick, with the track in the background there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a beautiful evening here at Sandown Park. Might get a little bit fresh overnight, but right now the conditions are absolutely perfect.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that you are 8 hours ahead of us, so we're building up to an evening of racing there, I'm assuming.
We are, yeah. First of our 3 Group 1 nights through May, and the Sapphire Crown is one of the great races on the calendar. It's been won by some of the true greats of the track, and Hall of Famers, the likes of Power to Burn, Bogey Lee, Zylia Allen, Sindine Shelby. Some fantastic greyhounds have won this race, and I'm sure tonight's edition will do that justice as well.
And that's a bitches contest, that one, is it?
It is, yeah, restricted to bitches only. It's best 32, so 4 heats last week. The winner and runner-up of each go into tonight's final, and $50,000 first prize awaits the winner.
Wow, huge prize money. Right, okay, let's get stuck in then, because I've got 1,000,001 questions for you, Mick. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Well, first off, obviously the show is still on the road in Australia. Coronavirus has sadly struck absolutely everywhere, all over the planet. We're eyeing up starting our racing again here in the UK. Obviously, Australia is a less densely populated place than the UK. How are you guys dealing with it? Place for everyone working there. What's kind of going on at the moment?
Yeah, so as a country, we're a little bit fortunate given the tracks is behind closed doors now. There's been some changes to procedures on race days. Social distancing obviously is very important. Boxing procedures, a whole bunch of different things. Every participant needs to have a health check when they arrive on course, including staff and officials and everyone else as well. So there have been quite a few changes to race day procedures, but it has kept us racing. So and with full support of the government as well, which is important.
Absolutely. Just quickly on that, the social distancing, one of the real problems facing us over here is exactly that, because at some stage, 6 dogs are all going to race around the track together, albeit there's 8 there in Australia. And those dogs have got to be collected as well by all the handlers. How are you coping with that side of it?
Yeah, so our races finish in a catching pen. So the dogs are contained into an area, and the catchers are going and collect them. They're spaced out, obviously. They can only go one at a time. But the dogs will sort of run around, and so it's once you work out how to do it, it's quite a straightforward process to maintain those distances. So the whole system's worked really well so far. As the dogs have been loaded, obviously 8 dogs in a race. Traditionally, they go in odd-numbered first, followed by the evens. They're now 1 and 5, 2 and 6. 3 and 7, 4 and 8, and that allows people to get in and out. So it's been a bit of an adjustment for the greyhounds as well. Obviously, they're spending a bit more time in the boxes than they would normally, but that hasn't had a big effect. They've adjusted pretty well as well.
Well, it's been brilliant to see, and there are plenty of punters in the UK who I know have been watching the videos and getting stuck into and enjoying your racing as well. Right, let's start then with ground racing as a subject in Australia. It's a big place. I think 32 times bigger than the UK, different states and territories. I'm assuming legal everywhere in all the states. Absolutely. And all the territories?
Yep, all states and territories except for the ACT, who made a change a couple of years back, but everywhere else it's absolutely legal. Each state is responsible for the racing within their own jurisdiction, and there's no federal racing minister as such. It's all a state responsibility. So there is a national framework of rules and policies and procedures, but ultimately the enforcement of the rules and race programs and integrity and other measures are all state-based responsibilities.
Okay, so here in the UK, we have the Greyhound Board of Great Britain, the GBGB. They are the regulator. They draw up all the rules of racing. They issue the licenses to handlers, trainers, owners, the tracks themselves. In what you're saying, is that the racing that goes on in each state, they kind of have their own GBGB?
Essentially, yeah. So Greyhound Racing Victoria is the governing body in Victoria. They license the tracks within Victoria. There's 13 clubs in Victoria that and a few coursing clubs that run racing in the state. That each state does have their own regulator, and each state is set up slightly differently as well. So there are some states like Western Australia that have all 3 codes sitting under the one banner. Queensland's also on that model, but in Victoria and South Australia and New South Wales, it is a regulator of the club sitting beneath. and some states, South Australia, for example, they are both a club and the regulator in a sense. So each state is set up a little bit differently. But within that, there's also Greyhounds Australasia, who looks after a lot of the naming and more national sort of issues. They do a lot of policy-based things. And Greyhound Clubs Australia sit over there as well. So the representative body for each of the clubs in the country.
Now, you are talking to someone, Mick, who is, I've done a little bit of homework, but pretty clueless about greyhound racing in Australia. What do you mean when you say clubs? Yeah,
so all of our racing is not for profit. So the actual running of a race day and race day functions are the responsibility of the club, outside of integrity and other measures for the actual race meeting. But management of facility and non-race day procedures are managed by the respective clubs, which have their own committee and staff. And so the two working together with JRV. So, for example, for today, a lot of the promotion, a lot of the leading and track maintenance and things specific to the venue is the club's responsibility. Come race day, around about 3 o'clock, the stewards arrive and they look after the race day procedures. So in terms of kenneling, the stewarding process of the day, swabs and collections and those sort of things are all done by GRV appointed stewards and other officers of GRV.
So how we've got, obviously the GRV are running the racing in Victoria. Who is part of the GRV and how is that formed?
So it's I'm not sure the actual title of it. It's a statutory body, basically. The board is appointed by the government. The racing minister of the day appoints the board, and they appoint the CEO and function that way. So it is a branch of the government, effectively, and they license for the clubs to. They issue the license for the clubs to race.
Okay, and finally, we will get on to more exciting stuff, talking about huge prize money. Who actually owns the tracks, the land themselves?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the club. So at Sandown Park, we own the land here. We're on I think it's about 18 acres all told. So the club owns the money, or the club's members own the land and the facility. Other clubs, some clubs own their land, others are on a lease from either local council or state government. So it does vary a little bit from club to club, but fortunately here at Sandown Park, we own our land. So
fantastic, yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Right, Mick, so I wake up in the morning in Australia and I think to myself, I fancy a bet on the greyhound racing. What are my options? Where do I go to? Here in the UK, we have bookmakers on course, and we have bookmakers in betting shops, online, and there are also betting exchanges such as Betfair. But in Australia, is it the same or do you work differently?
Yeah, it's similar. All our parimutuel betting, our totaliser betting is run by Tabcorp, who own the license, the exclusive license, and part of the license is to have the different agencies and pub tabs. So we can go down to your local and have a bet on all three codes and sports and others. They're a sports betting organisation as well. So they've got a lot of agencies in pubs and clubs. But there's also other options as well. There's a number of online bookmakers that you can go through. There are not so many on-course bookmakers anymore. Week to week, the crowds don't justify. They can't hold enough money to justify fielding on a normal race meeting. But we do get a couple in on those bigger nights. But generally speaking, it's either through a tab agency or through the phone or on the computer or any other number of ways you can have a bet. But Tabcorp is our big wagering partner. They have the parimutuel license, as I mentioned, and they've got a big fixed odds operation as well. So Tabcorp is, as you can probably see by the signage in the background there, they are very much a big partner of ours within greyhound racing.
Right, okay. And when we talk about Tab and you're talking parimutuel, for those that don't know, that is basically a tote service, pool betting.
Yep. Yep.
And is that statewide or national-wide?
Yeah.
Nationwide?
So again, it's a little bit state by state. So we bet into the Super Tab pool, which is basically Victoria, but it's also the ACT and Tasmania, I think, also bet into that same pool. Within New South Wales, they have their own pool as well. Queensland and South Australia bet into a different pool. Western Australia has its own tote, but they bet into the Super Tab pool. Plus, there's a bit of commingling that goes on as well. So New Zealand, for example, bet into the pools as well, which gives a bit more liquidity. But yeah, again, it is very much state-based.
Okay. And am I right in thinking that your sport, your setup, everything, the prize money is funded through taking a percentage of that wagering?
Largely, yeah. The majority of it is through wagering turnover. There's an agreement in place with Tabcorp, and we get a percentage of the. It's between the three codes, but we get a percentage of the turnover there. And there's a different arrangement in place for the fixed odds operators and the corporate bookmakers. So, yeah, basically they've got to, through various mechanisms, they've got to contribute back to the sport as well.
Okay, is that revenue based or turnover?
It's a good question, and it's I'm not actually sure what the arrangement is. Grain Racing Victoria looks after the commercial side of it. Don't quote me on that one, but yeah, it's one or the other, obviously, but I'm not sure exactly which.
Okay, and when you mentioned codes, you say three codes. I'm assuming you mean horse racing, ground racing, and is it harness racing?
Harness racing, yep.
Harness racing, okay. And do those three codes take a different percentage for their funding?
Yeah, again, it depends on the state you're in. It's largely market driven, so the percentage that your code generates is contributes to the return you get. It's not strictly, if Greyhound Racing, I think it's about 23% of turnover now. We don't get 23% of it necessarily, but yeah, there is a reward there for increasing turnover and your market share.
23%.
Yeah, it might even be a little bit higher now.
Wow.
Thoroughbred racing is obviously the big dog in town, and it's still very much a traditional Saturday afternoon, have a bet on the horses and take a quaddie and do all that. But yeah, Greyhound Racing has increased its percentage significantly over the last 20 odd years.
And I'm assuming that's quite a big chunk compared to over in the UK, some of the funding that we get. I'm guessing that is basically the difference in you racing for $50,000 as opposed to perhaps racing to a level of prize money that we do over here.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, it's all not for profit. So any returns that the industry gets, it tips it into facilities and infrastructure, as you can see here. But prize money is the big driver as well. We try and maximise returns to owners and trainers and ensure that there's a good incentive for them to get involved in the sport. And the prize money figure is quite attractive if you wanted to get involved in the sport here. It's about $46 or $47 million a year in Victoria alone, or about $123 million across the country. So there is a lot of prize money to be won. And yeah, the clubs and governing bodies are all very keen to maximise that return to owners and trainers.
Now, as you just mentioned there, the astronomical prize money. Who actually has a say in sort of which facets of the sport get what sort of funding? So who says, okay, you can have X amount for prize money, we want to relay the track, we want to buy a tractor, etc. Who has that say?
Yeah, it's a little bit depending on what we wanted to spend it on. It's often a consultation between us and Greyhound Racing Victoria. As I said, we've got good government support as well, so occasionally there's grants available there as well. But in terms of the race day, track maintenance, week to week sort of stuff, we get an allowance for that, and the club looks after that. Prize money, the standard stakes money is paid for by JRV, and then we get an allowance or an allocation for feature races, which the club, in consultation with JRV, determines on how that's spent. So, and then on top of that, the club generates revenue, which again goes back into prize money as well. So, so these big headline races like your Sandown Cups and Sapphire Crowns, Harrison Dawson's, and of course the Melbourne Cup, that's topped up by the club.
Well, it sounds absolutely fantastic. I think the concept of being non-profit is brilliant. So I'm assuming that a lot of people involved in the running of the club, should we say, they're part of the club. That's not a job to them. That's something that they almost do as a hobby. No,
absolutely. One of the taglines we have here, you might be able to see it on some of the signage there as well. We love the dogs. It's all about the greyhounds, and everyone who works for the club does have a deep interest and a love for the greyhound, and that's important. It's our job and we take it seriously. But when you get to race nights like this, it is good fun, and if you can't enjoy the racing, then really it's not the right game for you. You've got to have a real passion for it and enjoy nights like this, or any racing for that matter. I was here on Sunday, and it was quite cold that night, and there was certainly no crowd, obviously, but it is good fun when you see these dogs at their absolute best.
Absolutely, they are the stars of the show. Right, can't help but have noticed, Mick, the social media activity in around Australian greyhound racing is fantastic. Marketing now, is each track in charge of their own marketing, and is that money that comes out of that pool as well?
Yeah, largely. So the clubs look after, or largely look after their main racing and their community engagement and local level. Obviously, we're the shop front for the industry, so that local relationships with the local media and the local communities are very much club driven. Grain Racing Victoria has its own marketing department and run events through there as well. So when you get to the bigger races, and particularly when we've got crowds, obviously we get the support from Grain Racing Victoria there, and they also look after the big promotions of the sport. So when they run a big campaign promoting grain racing generally, or a big push into ownership, or whatever campaign they're running that's largely Grain Racing Victoria, usually in consultation with the clubs, and yeah, that's all come about.
But there are social media activity. There is, I've seen clips of TV coverage as well, mainstream TV coverage. And it feels, just from an outsider looking in, that radio coverage is quite a big aspect of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a racing radio station here, RSN 927, who actually sponsor the RSN Sandown Cup in a couple of weeks' time. But it's a dedicated racing station. They cover off on a little bit of sport as well, but it is primarily a racing station. And SEN is also excuse me, it's largely a sports station, but they cover a bit of racing as well. So we do get a lot of good support there. And obviously, given we're still racing now, and there's a lot of sports that are paused indefinitely, there are other opportunities there to jump in. And we've got a bit of newspaper coverage, mainstream newspaper coverage. So the Herald Sun's the biggest circulation, or the newspaper with the biggest circulation in the country. We've got a story in there today. Channel 9, one of our bigger TV networks, run a couple of stories over the last little bit. So the great thing about racing is there's always a good story. We have 12 races a night, and so there's at least 12 stories to come out of every race. So it's good fun, and particularly when you get to good races, to be able to go out there and tell those stories, it's a life-changing experience for a lot of the trainers and owners to get into a Group 1 final. There's two in tonight. Robin Moore with Chart Topper, who's drawn box 1. It's his first Group 1 in 20 years in the sport. He bred the greyhound. He's racing against some of the biggest names in the sport. So it's a fantastic effort. And Medallia Maggie's in the 2. 45 years John Connor's been in the sport, and this is the first time he's had a Group 1 finalist. So those sort of stories are fantastic, and they're an easy sell to any media outlet.
Absolutely. I think that's what I'll be cheering on in that final. I've got to ask you, Mick, because whenever we over here try and push our sport into mainstream media, whether that be newspapers, television, even online, there is a huge resistance. There are people that are noisy and they make a big fuss and they are against greyhound racing. Is there those pockets of opposition in Australia as well?
There is, yeah. Some areas more so than others. We're fortunate here that we've got full government support. Both sides of government are very supportive of the racing industry generally. There have been a few incidents. In New South Wales recently, for example, the sport was actually banned before it was overturned, and the support we've got across the community now is very strong. Grain Racing Victoria in particular has put a lot of focus on the integrity and welfare of the sport, and social license is a big buzzword, and investing so heavily and being able to show that these dogs mean more than just they're not just a racing animal, they're part of the family. So the more of that we can show, the stronger we are in the longer term.
And what advice would you give us as to being the key to breaking into that mainstream media? How can we get our good stories onto TV, into newspapers?
Yeah, look, it's a tough nut to crack. It's a very competitive area, of course. Everyone wants to get on TV and everyone wants to be in the papers, but situation normal, it is hard for us to get any coverage in those mainstreams, but we've full control of our own social channels. The technology's there now to show people what's happening on course, and there's a great shot from last year's Melbourne Cup behind the boxes, and just seeing the passion, the emotion of Anthony Azzopardi when he won the world's greatest grain race was fantastic to show, and we can show all that. And so we make sure we've got people in the right spots to capture those moments, because it's those moments that shows what the sport mean to people, and that's the best data we can run for the sport, to show that passion that the people have for their dogs.
Okay, well, some of the marketing that you mentioned there, the social media, that's almost sadly non-existent in places here in the UK. Where do you think you would be standing without any of that?
Without that social media side of things, we wouldn't be able to show a lot of those stories. It does become very So in Australia, we're very much a betting culture.
Right.
We'll bet on two flies running off a wall, but even on Sky Racing, who show our races, it is wall-to-wall coverage. It's one race after the
Right.
next, after the next, after the next. So if you focus purely on that racing side of it, then you're absolutely open to the criticism that it is just about gambling. We're just a gambling product. It is important to show those stories, and the social media stuff allows us, it gives us a platform to show those stories, and you hit the right chords, it does get shared around, and it goes viral. It's a bit cliche, but when you get a good story out there, people are happy to share it because people like good news stories. And the dogs are a beautiful animal, and that relationship with the people who deal with them every day is, it's very sellable and very real.
Absolutely. A huge stumbling block over here, rightly or wrongly, is the issue of media rights. Now, I know that, you show replays on social media. Replays are very accessible. Here in the UK, there are broadcasting companies, who have the rights to broadcast, transmit and film the racing, and they actually own the rights to them. So you have to purchase replays from the track. How does it work over there? Because I know if I miss a race in Australia within not a big time frame, it's going to be available for me to watch up online. So who actually owns the product itself?
Yeah, so Great Race Victoria negotiates all the media rights on behalf of the clubs. And within those deals, it allows them to put replays up on YouTube. Tabcorp, again, is one of our big partners. So within minutes, sometimes less, after the race, you can see the replay either through their socials or on their app. And within 15 minutes, we have replays up on YouTube as well. So you can go through the Watchdog form guide and access it there. Again, each state's a little bit different, but being able to watch the races and watch high quality videos to have a look at the dogs and the form and all that sort of thing is important. So that is a big focus there, and one of the reasons why GRV has developed the Watchdog app, so they can control that footage to a degree and make it available to those who are after it.
And again, I'm assuming all of that technology, the streaming, the video database, the replays, everything, that again is funded out of that 23%.
Yep, absolutely. So all that money goes in and covers off on all the, I'm not sure what the revenues they have at Grey and Race Victoria each year, but yeah, all that comes out of there.
Well, that was going to be my final question before Matt fires a few bullets at you. In terms of, we mentioned the 23%, without, going into too much detail, do we know how much money is in the pot? So I'm sure there are annual reports out there somewhere, but is it just purely Australian people betting into that? Is there Asian money flooding the market as well? How does it all work and go into the pot?
Yeah, so Tabcorp has a number of commingling arrangements with different jurisdictions. New Zealand's the obvious one, but I think South Africa may bet into the pools as well. And there are a couple in Asia, but I'm not sure which. But there is a growing demand for Australian greyhound racing, Victorian greyhound racing in particular. And they're working through all that as well. So I think there's a few countries in Europe that already get our vision, UK being one, obviously, and there's a few others. And it's certainly a growing market. And how we present those races and making that available, good quality vision is important. So yeah, that's obviously an area that they work pretty hard on.
Well, yeah, I'll let Matt take over now. But Matt, I mean, I was already quite keen on moving to Australia, and from what Mick's been saying already, it's become even more appealing.
Yeah, I think that's the most important question that either of us can ask. How easy is it to get a job over there?
At the moment, not so much, but hopefully we get through that very, very quickly.
Interesting sort of like licensing and registration over here. Trainers are licensed, kennel hands are licensed. Is it the same over there? You have all these, proper strict ways of going about this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Grey and Race Victoria, again, they look after all the licensing. So you need to become a licensed, pretty much every aspect of the sport. You need a license to be an owner, trainer, handler, catcher. A lot of the positions on course, you need a license to be trained up in. So Grey and Race Victoria looks after all that. There's small fees involved for trainers and handlers and the like, but for owners, you just need to fill in a form and you're registered and you're good to go.
Excellent.
And a Victorian resident. So that's the only sticking point there.
Yeah, although hopefully we're working on moving those goalposts a little bit soon.
Fingers crossed.
I believe there are 65 tracks in Australia. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, are they fairly well spread, or are they more in certain parts and not so much in others?
Yeah, so there's 13 in Victoria, 3 in Tassie, 3 in WA, 5 I think in South Australia, 30 odd in New South Wales, and the rest are in Queensland. So it depends a little bit on population and the size of the states. Obviously, Tassie's only a small state, and most of it's forest, so 3 tracks is more than enough down there. New South Wales is quite big, the population spread a little bit more, so they have more tracks than others, but yeah, they are pretty well spread out. And fortunately in Victoria we have a track in pretty much every big population area and big regional towns, so it gives us, again, that gives that shop front to the community, and makes the sport accessible to everyone.
And I assume that there is a better standard of racing in certain areas as well, and of course better prize money that goes along with it.
Yeah, and they go hand in glove. So the more prize money available for these normal races, obviously that attracts a higher quality of dog. Victoria is largely, well, widely regarded as having the strongest racing across the country. And again, that's largely prize money driven, but also in facilities and the types of tracks as well. Obviously, some dogs are better suited to different types of tracks. And in Victoria, we're fortunate to have a range of different tracks available to those dogs. So every race tonight is worth at least 5,000 to the winner. So naturally, your better dogs gravitate towards the city races, but even for the slower dogs or dogs that they don't run the full 500, there's options out there for them as well.
I mean, 5,000 is roughly £2,500. Now, we're running one-off opens over here are generally £200. I mean, that's pretty appealing prize money that's on offer from a British point of view. So, how easy is it to become an owner over there?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It is an area that is probably underdeveloped in Australia. Syndications is you can register a syndicate of mates and get them all together, and that's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to advertising syndicates, the government starts to get involved and the process slows down. So effectively, you're selling shares when you offer a syndication, and you've got to jump through all those hoops. So at Sandown Park here, we've managed to get through a lot of that, and the race with syndications has brought a lot of people into the sport. We've actually got one of the greyhounds running around tonight, Wallbanger, going around in the 8th race, is a graduate of the National Greyhound Draft that was run a couple of years ago, and is now racing for a spot in a Group 1 final. So the great part about that is it's low costs, and it got a lot of people involved. And unfortunately, I can't be here tonight, but there'll be a lot of people cheering on at home, hoping for Wallbanger to get up tonight.
Lovely. I mean, syndicates are a huge part of things over here in the UK. You know, it's easy to get involved, a small share for a small cost.
Yep.
Is that something that there are a lot of syndicates over there?
There are, yeah. So it's not uncommon for local sporting clubs, your local cricket club or footy club, to get together and buy a dog. As I said, especially once you get in the country, all the big regional centres have a greyhound track nearby, and a lot of trainers make themselves quite available and are accessible to join the dots in that sense. The syndication we're running through the club race with syndications, it's $1,200 a share, and you get a 2% share in 3 greyhounds. So it is low cost, it's low entry. But you can have a lot of fun along the way. Obviously, with 3 dogs, they're going to be racing fairly often, and we've seen a big increase actually in the number of people who are interested in buying a greyhound over the last little period as well. So yeah, obviously with that increased airtime and some good races and a bit of success in the syndication as well, it means more people are getting involved, or getting interested in and getting involved.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility is a huge thing. In London, a track closed down years ago, Catford. It used to be very easy to get round the back of the grandstand to see the paddock, to see the dogs before the race being checked over by the vet. You know, is there that kind of openness at Sandown Park? Can you go and see the dogs before the race and after?
Yep, absolutely. So I'll get Joe to swing around. He's give him a chance to rest the arms a little bit. He's doing a great job there. Here's our dining room. It holds about 140 people. Obviously, it's sitting right over the track. And the general public area here. But before each race, we bring the dogs out and they parade in the parade yards. There's one on each side here, but the parade yard's just here. So Melbourne Cup night, you'll see people lined along the fence line, all queuing up to have a look at the dogs. And you'll see the kennel block over a bit further around there, the greyhounds are just about kennelled now, I think. So might be too far away from racing, but you might be able to just make out on the side of the building there. There's a big glass window. Anyone's welcome to come up and have a look and see the dogs, not just being kennelled, but in their pre-race preparations and post-race as well. So it's all, we're very proud of the facility here. It is what we think is the world leader in the way races should be run and conducted here. So we're very proud of it, and we're happy to show it off and have people check it all out.
Excellent. And what's the cost of buying a decent dog in Australia?
Oh, that's a good question. So it does depend quite a bit. There's a number of factors involved. Obviously, you could buy a beautifully bred pup. Uphill Jill had some pups recently, 25,000. If they were for sale, that's the sort of figure you'd be looking at. Obviously, as the dogs get older and closer to racing, or once they start racing, get a better gauge of how they are ability-wise and where their upside is. But it's not uncommon to hear big six-figure amounts being thrown around for some of those greyhounds that are capable of running time and have that upside and potential, not just win good races, but have some success at stud as well.
And how do kennel fees work with trainers over there? I mean, it's different to over here. Over here, a trainer will charge you X number of pounds per day for a racing dog, but I believe it's different over there.
It is, yeah. By and large, it's a 50-50 agreement between the owner and the trainer. Once the dog gets to the racing kennel, basically the trainer looks after the training expenses and the upkeep for the dog, and they split the prize money 50-50. So obviously there's some costs in rearing and education early doors to get the dog to the track, but once they're at the track, there's no ongoing fee.
Excellent stuff. I think what are the perks of being an owner over there? Do you get like a free entry card, a meal in a restaurant discount once in a while? What could you say to draw more people into the sport? How do we get that?
So within the club here, we it's free entry to all race meetings anyway.
Okay.
But owners, if they've got dogs in, there's discounts on course for meals and the like. But the accessibility and being part of something with your bunch of mates, that's the best selling point. It's obviously not at the moment, but we've had plenty of dogs in here, and you see the big crew of people coming up to get that photo with the dog, and that's the ability to share the excitement of owning a greyhound that wins a race. Any race is pretty special, and if you can jag that good one that wins a big race, it can be genuinely life changing with the prize money that is available.
And I would assume on one of your bigger nights, there's a good sized crowd, excellent atmosphere. What would be a normal crowd at Sandown, and what would be the Melbourne Cup night type crowd?
Yeah, so crowds week to week, they're not big. It's Thursday nights are a difficult night, and once you get into winter, we've got footy on, more and more footy on a Thursday night. Thursday night's a training night for a lot of community sports, so we don't get big crowds week to week. But around feature races, the Easter, we have a big kids night on the night before Easter or before Good Friday, brings thousands of people in, and Melbourne Cup night, weather permitting. We've had a horrible run with weather the last few years, but if the good night weather-wise, we could get 4,000 or 5,000 people here. So if you see, you can see the blue seats here. There's about 400 there. In the dining room, in the tiers, there's about 120 or so we can fit there. The chairman's lounge on top, there's another 140. Behind the blue seats, we can fit another 120 or so up in there. And at the end of the home straight here, we set up a marquee with dining in there as well. So all told, we can have 450, 500 diners on the night, and well as the general public. So it's, as I said, you get a good night weather-wise, and we'll pack the place to the rafters.
And you say the Melbourne Cup's your biggest race of the year. Obviously, the Greyhound Derby in England is our biggest. Is there a Derby in Australia?
Not really, no. So most of our races now, most of our feature races are a straight heats and final. Traditionally, there are a lot of races that were heat, semi, and final, but because there are so many races now, and Australia's a big country, and everyone wants to see the good dogs go around, so there needs to be a bit of space and sort of condense those series down to allow those dogs to race in different events, or different series. So most of them are heats and finals now, and generally speaking, they follow the similar sort of format, but there are a few exceptions there. Melbourne Cup, you need to run a prelude or an exemption race to qualify for the heats, so there is a bit of a process just to get to the Melbourne Cup heats, but for most of them, just nominate, and the best nominations will get a start.
And there's a big range of distances in the UK. I mean, what trips have you got over there? You know, are there big races over? You know, if you have a sprinter, a stayer, are there lots of big races for them?
Yeah, so Sandown here and most city tracks around the country, 500 metres or so is the main distance. 515 metres here, we also run over 595 and 715. They're the metro distances, widely accepted they're the metro distances, and that's where most of the big races are. But if you can get a good sprinter, that's where pretty much every major cup is run over. There are races, particularly the provincials, that are over a shorter trip. I think about 270 odd metres. There's a track in New South Wales whose name escapes me, but around about 270 odd metres is about as short as distance as it'll get. But even on those provincial tracks, their main distance will be where the cup is, typically speaking. So somewhere like a Warragul will be 460 metres on a horseshoe track. That's their big race. And the Bendigo Club in Victoria actually just announced their cup prize money will be going up for this year. 50,000 to the winner, and that's over 425 metres. But other than Hillsville that are up the straight, that's about as short as you get. Most of the money is at 500 metres.
And actually, straight track racing is very different to what we have over here as well. I mean, do you ever get any international entries?
We haven't for a while. The Top Gun, going back 25 years ago, was an international event at one stage. We have the occasional greyhound cross the Tasman, so between New Zealand and Australia. There's a couple of races over in New Zealand that are actually exemption races into the Melbourne Cup. So we don't get a lot. It's not a cheap exercise. New Zealand is part of our national championships. But there's a different system over there. They finish onto the lure instead of having a catching pen. So there's a few little issues you have to work through there. But the big one for dogs coming from overseas is the quarantine issues. New Zealand, obviously, being our little cousin over the Tasman there, they don't have a lot of those issues. But any dogs coming from the UK or from Europe or from North America, there is a quarantine issue there. So we do get some dogs coming across from the US for breeding purposes primarily. But yeah, race dogs, not so much.
Okay. And of course, you have 8 dog races there as standard. We have 6 over here. But you also have a string of match races. I think the Speed Star at Sandown. I mean, is that something that really captures the imagination, having match racing?
It does, yeah. It's a nice little exhibition for those greyhounds that maybe don't. They may not have the best racecraft or lack that little bit of early speed to get into those races. But when we designed the series, we wanted to see who the fastest dog in the country was, and 2 out is the best way to do that. And it's grown from there. I think we've run 9 or 10 of these Speed Star now. And if you look at wagering, it's quite strong on it. There's a lot of interest in that sense. If you look at our online engagement, it's enormous. It's the second biggest. We run 2 a year. They're usually second and third biggest in terms of online engagement that we run for the year, behind the Melbourne Cup. The other thing we find is that greyhound racing, reading form guides with 8 dogs, with all the lingo and jargon that goes into it, can be quite intimidating. The Speed Star attracts a whole different audience. There's 2 dogs, just find the fastest one. Head-to-head betting, it's like sports betting for greyhound racing, and there's a few old timers, a few traditionalists that don't really like it. It's not real racing in their world, but for a lot of younger people in particular, they can't get enough of it.
It's competition that I really like, and certainly over here I'd love to see Kevin Boothby at Toaster implement something different to try anyway. So when you have a young pup hitting the track, over here you can run at 16 months. I believe over there it's a little bit later.
It is 18 months, yep. In fact, Blake Opium, who's a favourite in the Sapphire Crown tonight, she made her debut exactly on 18 months. So they have to hold her back a little bit. Unfortunately, it lined up to a really rich maiden up at Bendigo from memory. So she started on her 18th birthday, the day of her 18-month birthday. Yeah, you know what I mean. She turned 18 months and raced that day.
Yeah, now over here you would have official trials before you get graded onto the card. How do things work over there?
Yeah, we don't have any qualification trials or performance trials. New South Wales does. We don't have any such trials in Victoria. I'd be quite happy for them to come in, to be honest. There is a bit of pushback. There's reasons for both, and it's quite a spirited discussion depending on who you're speaking to about it. But typically for a greyhound to make its debut, they just nominate for a series, whether it's a maiden heat and final like we're running at the moment. Last Sunday, in fact, one of the blue tick dogs went around on Sunday in a maiden series there. But if you haven't got one in mind, then you can just come along and nominate for a meeting. And yeah, if the nominations, you get enough nominations, the race will be run.
And do you have races specifically for puppies, for novices? What's the structure of the way the grading works there? Yeah,
so the very basic grading structure, every dog starts as a maiden, obviously. You win your maiden, you go to a grade 7. Win a grade 7, you go to grade 6. Win a grade 6, you get a grade 5. That's the hard 4. Once you're a grade 4, you can't go below that. But every time you win a race, you go up in grade. If you miss a placing for 2 starts, you come back a grade. Each track is graded the same way. So you could be a grade 5 at Sandown, but a grade 3 at the Meadows and a grade 2 at Warragul. But there's little conditions in there as well. So if you go win a Group 1, if you win a Melbourne Cup, you're not going to be a grade 5 at Cranbourne next start. You're going to be upgraded. So, but generally speaking, yeah, you just move up in the grades like that.
I mean, do the dogs switch between the tracks quite often?
They do, yeah. So again, fortunately, Victoria, not being a big state, it's about 6 hours, I think, from Sale out in the east out to back to Horsham in the extreme west. Might be a little bit longer than 6 hours, but every track's in between. So again, depending on the type of dog and what suits it. For example, if you're in the southeast, I'm in Cranbourne. You got a track in Cranbourne. You got Sandown half an hour down the road. You got Warragul 40 minutes the other way. Traralgon's out of action at the moment, but that's probably another half an hour away from Warragul. The Meadows over the other side of town's a bit over an hour from Cranbourne, so you've got lots of options depending on the dog. Every track obviously has its own little variances, a slightly different layout. Boxes are slightly different. There's little changes in each track, and some dogs obviously enjoy some tracks more than others. So yeah, you've got plenty of options there.
I mean, it's very different to the way we do things over here. And Dave, that's certainly not the only huge difference between us and Australia.
No, there are some most notable ones as well, Mick. One being, quite a big talking point over here when we peer in on Australian greyhound racing is the lack of seeding. It is just a random draw, and any dog can end up in any box.
It is, yeah. It's one that's been looked at several times. There's obviously merit in it. The layout of our tracks make it a little bit more difficult than it would be in the UK. The inside lure just makes that whole process a little bit more difficult. But what you'll find in Australia is they don't tend to run wide anyway. Even those dogs that do look like they're going wide, because of the positioning of the boxes, when you see them head on, they're actually running in a straight line. Once they take the first stride or two, they either hit hard to the rail, or they push down to the rail, or they hold their line. So there isn't really a lot of dogs that'll push out off the track, certainly not in the early stages anyway.
Now, Mick, we are recording this live. How long have you got there until the first race? We're coming up close to that. The sky has certainly turned there. It's a lot darker there since we started.
It certainly has. I think they're just out the front of the kennels now, so the stir-up will go around shortly.
Are you in the way? Can we maybe go and have are you able to give us a little tour and have a little look?
Yeah, we can do. What we might do, and we'll work out how we do this while Joe. I'll give you a look at the trophy while we're here. This is the Group 1 Sapphire Crown. As I mentioned, it's been won by some of the true greats of the sport. It became a bitches only race in 2002. It's been won by 3 Hall of Famers, a couple of Greyhounds of the Year, Melbourne Cup winner. It is an outstanding honour roll and one of the genuinely great races on the calendar. We'll head down towards the starting boxes here. We might actually cut them off on the way to starting boxes, but
now close to what we have here in the UK.
It is. In fact, we might be able to just show you how far off the. Sorry, Joe. You see how far the boxes are off the rail. So as I said before, when it comes to seating and preferential boxes, for the dog to turn right out of the boxes and run wide.
Checking on welfare, that's a huge, as I'm sure it is over there, a huge aspect of the sport. But they're also at the track as well, making sure that all the rules and regulations are met. Do you have that kind of system as well? Do you have those people almost floating around, just monitoring what's going on?
Yeah, we do. So we've got it's either 5 or 6 stewards on course for any one meeting. Tonight we'll probably have a few extras because they'll take more samples than they normally would, given that we've got the Group 1 final plus Group 1 heats as well. So so the lures just starting up now. So yeah, they're responsible for swabbing, for they're supervising the races. They're positioned around the track, obviously keeping an eye on any offences during the race, but yeah, they're fully responsible for all the integrity measures and yeah, and maintaining and enforcing the rules on race night.
Okay, absolutely fantastic. And we've talked plenty about during racing. Wow, that is really noisy, that lure on the inside arm there. Are they all like that, Mick? Are they all that noisy?
Yeah, some more so than others. We actually had a new running rail put in a little while back and quietened it down a little bit. There were a few complaints just how quiet it was when we first had it installed, but there's a couple of squeakers on there. The actual carriage that attaches to the rail has changed a little bit over the years as well. So yeah, they are quite noisy.
Okay, right. And as I was saying, you know, we spoke plenty about the racing itself. In Australia, how does it work in terms of life after racing, welfare and rehoming? What's the setup?
Yep. So all greyhounds, the policy is that any greyhound that can be rehomed is rehomed. The industry sponsors the greyhound adoption program, and that's been a huge success. There are thousands of dogs that have found a home having gone through the GAP program. We recently had a change of laws in Victoria that there's a greyhound specific law that they had to be muzzled in public. That's no longer the case. And once they pass through the GAP program, they have a green collar, and so they've done all the testing. They've been desensitised from racing, and they make great pets. It's not uncommon now to walk around the streets of Melbourne and see people walking their greyhounds. So yeah, it's been a big success. And there's other rehoming groups as well, and a lot of greyhounds they don't go through that process because the owners just keep them. They're at home on the couch.
And how is all of that funded? That program?
Yeah, so again, it's through GRV with government support. So yeah, the fees to adopt a greyhound are quite low. So yeah, it is an industry sponsored program.
Okay, brilliant. Right, where are you standing now then, Mick? You on your way to the kennels?
Yeah, so I'll just hold up here because of the social distancing laws, of course. So
absolutely right. Yeah,
the handlers will wander through shortly. They're just starting to form up now. I think they won't be too far away. So yeah, we might just hold here and let them come through. And yeah, so we're just behind the 5:15 boxes. Obviously, this is where it all happens on race day. Being a Group 1 final, Sky Racing will be broadcasting from here. They're in the marquee there. So yeah, that's how it all works.
Well, the product itself, Mick, it seems fantastic. Where do you feel that there's improvement in Australia? Is there anything that you feel that it seems like you do a hell of a lot of things right, and perhaps better than here in the UK? Where is there room for improvement there?
I think there's still space in the ownership area. I think that's a very underdeveloped area within the sport. And I think even the promotional side of things, I think there's a lot more stories that can be told, and the opportunities are there to further improve the coverage when it comes to socials and just getting the greyhound tales out there. That's as I said, there's a story in every race, and I don't think we can tell enough of them.
Absolutely, yeah, I would agree with that. So this is the first race of the night, is it, Mick?
It is, yep. So they're just about to head over to the starting boxes. So as I said, the loading procedure's changed somewhat now. It's now instead of just the odds going in followed by the evens, we'll have 1 and 5 go in, and it does take a little bit longer than it used to, but the guys are a bit more used to it now, and it's it does go a lot more efficiently than it did when we first started. There's a bit of confusion around. Obviously, any changes does it takes a little bit to get used to, but no, it's a much more polished system now.
Well, we're certainly enjoying the action here in the UK. Just finally, then, Mick, is ground racing in Australia in a good place? Is it still growing? Is it thriving?
Yeah, I think it is. It's in fact, I'm sure it is. It's a fantastic product. The greyhounds are absolutely outstanding. There's good people throughout the industry, and the more of it, the genuine sporting side of it, as long as we keep an eye on that and enjoy the athletes for what they are, I think we'll continue to see it grow. And aside from being a wagering medium, as I said, the sporting element of it, there's nothing better than seeing the fast dogs do their thing. And as we saw, as I mentioned before, with the Speed Start, that structure to see the best dogs going around, the interest in it and the excitement around seeing these fast dogs do their thing is extremely high. And I'm sure we'll continue to see that as we go along.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that we can perhaps somehow follow your lead as well over there in Australia, because you're certainly doing a lot of things. Right, well, I won't keep you any longer, Mick, because as I say, we're off and running the first race there. So we really appreciate your time, Matt. I'm all out of questions. Are you?
Yeah, I've got nothing else.
Well, I hope everyone at home has enjoyed watching as well, Mick. We thank you for your time, your knowledge, your expertise, and maybe we can do this again sometime for any more questions and a quick catch-up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy to any time. It is a fantastic sport the world over. So the more we can do to promote and learn from each other, we've all got things we can learn and do better from. So any questions at all or anything we do to help out, please sing out, because it is a fantastic sport and we want to see it thrive everywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Mick Floyd, there at Sandown Park, and Joe on the camera as well. Top work. He can give his arms a rest now. But yeah, and thank you to everyone joining us as well. We've really enjoyed learning all about Australian ground racing. Thank you, Mick.
A pleasure. And make sure you're tuning in for the Sapphire Crown Black Opium. If you are going to have a bet race 4, number 1, there's one for you. So make sure you're on.
Top man. Thank you, Mick. Cheers.
Thank you very much.